Oh, here we go. Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Here we go. Morning, Ellie. Morning, Darren. Morning, Michael. Morning, Adrian. Morning, Bobby.
Hi, Steve.
Morning, everyone. Great to see you. Great to see you all. If you've just joined in normal fashion, could you mute, please, just to cut out any background noise? That would be great. Thank you, Ellie. That's brilliant. Darren, if you could mute as well, that'd be great. John, if you could mute. Henry, you're still, yeah, that's fine. Okay, great. Thank you very much. There's more joining. Morning, Adrian. Morning, David. Morning, Padraig. Great to see you. Thanks for joining. William, bring William in. There we are. Admit all. Here we go. More joining. More joining. It's an excellent turnout, everybody. So thank you all for attending today's event. I was just saying to Sir Steve earlier that his event last week was very well attended. I'm not sure we'll get to about 800, but I think there's a lot of interest in this particular subject. So thanks for that, Steve. It was great. Right, okay, so I'll keep monitoring the lobby and welcome everybody to this week's Pension Playpen, where we have Sir Steve Webb discussing inheritance tax and pensions. I know it's a very, very hot topic, a lot of interest, which I know Steve will tell you about. Before we start, we are recording. Ellie, Darren, Henry, Palwinder, thumbs up, we're all okay being recorded. Peter, thanks for the hand, brilliant. I know Steve is going to do a lot of talking today. I think Steve is okay with interjections, sort of intelligent questions, or you can put them in the chat, but we do like it to be interactive. So raise a hand if you wish, and then Steve can decide whether he wants to do that or wait. But without any further ado, so Steve, over to you, and thanks in advance for today's session.
Thanks very much, Steve, and good morning, everybody. We thought this might be a useful thing to follow up on the webinar that I did with my colleague Alistair Mays from LCP and Claire Moffat from Royal London last week. We had over 800 people register for it, and it's obviously a hot topic. And one of the feedbacks we got from the webinar is, please, can you do another one? So there's I think, a lot of interest in the pensions and IHT. And I guess one of the reasons for doing something now is that in July this year, the government changed what's going to happen. So just to recap, we had the October 2024 budget. It seems like a world away already, announcing that from April 2027, and you hear used described in various different ways, but unspent pension pots as a broad phrase would be included in the assessment for inheritance tax. I'm going to use, I'm just going to say something at the beginning about terminology here, because I'm not particularly a pensions tax specialist. And obviously, if you've got super detailed pensions tax questions, I know a man who is, as it were, and I can pass those on. But something that I found confuses a lot of people is the use of the word estate. And I think it's worth being clear that estate is used to mean two different things at the same time, and it causes a lot of confusion. So traditionally, the estate has been the thing that the will covers. So the property, the assets, and all that kind of stuff, and the will says who should get what. And pensions have not been covered by the will. So who gets your pension depends on the trustees of your scheme and that kind of thing. Now, when inheritance tax applies to pensions, pensions will be in the estate for inheritance tax purposes, but out of the estate still for the will. And this it's just worth being clear about that. So I did my column for This Is Money this week, responding to a reader who said, actually, it was a question about, I've used ChatGPT, I've used AI to ask me a question about pensions and IHT. And ChatGPT said that pensions are outside the estate, which is kind of true in the sense they're not governed by the will. They're within the scope of IHT, and he said, therefore, I can't use any of my pension to pay the IHT bill. And I said, no, that's actually wrong. And it's confusion about which estate we were talking about, and the AI perhaps hadn't got that subtle distinction. So just to be aware that the word estate in this context get used to mean two different things, and it's worth always being clear on that. Anyway, so at a very high level, what was announced last year, what's just changed, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the process. So someone dies, what happens next? And HMRC have set out a 5-stage process. It's called the 5-stage process. It's probably a 20-stage process, I reckon, but I'll walk you through it. And what I want to try and do is just give you a sense of how it feels and what the experience will be from the member or the person dealing with the estate, and also what the pension scheme will have to deal with, what the trustees will have to do, what they'll have to do by when, and all that kind of stuff. So just to give you a sense of what's going to change. So to recap, Rachel Reed stands up and says from April 2027, unspent pensions balances will be included in the estate for inheritance tax purposes. Now, you might say, well, why wait till April 2027? And when HMRC phoned me on the day of that budget, they said, we want to make inheritance tax digital. So that may gladden your heart, it may not. But, you know, the idea is that at the moment, IHT is very much a paper-based process. So if I table freedom of information requests about IHT, they often say, well, you know, we'd have to open a big cupboard and take out a big pile of paper forms and go through them one by one, and we can't do that. So the idea is to streamline it, to digitize it, so that by the time all of this comes in, there will be new tools to assist the process. And that's quite important, because actually without that, it will be very difficult to do what I'm about to describe. So April 2027. What they originally planned was two things that have since changed. So originally it was planned that the pension schemes, what they call the pension schemes administrator, so the trust-based scheme or the insurance company provider, whoever it happened to be, would be responsible for paying the IHT, element one. And element two, that as well as DC pots, which kind of seems fairly obvious, DB death in service benefits would be included. So they gave a list on the day of the budget, a long list of is this in, is this out, is this in, is this out, DB, DC, and so on. And death in service benefits were originally in. So since then, they ran a big consultation, and the results of that were published in July 2025 with two major changes. One might say, because the industry expressed their views in a way that the future bereaved families of Britain couldn't, because of course, you don't know it's you until it happens, kind of thing. So there was I don't think there's any real voice for the member in any of this, but obviously the industry had a view and lobbied effectively. So what's changed is, first of all, it will be what I'm going to call the personal representative who is responsible for paying the IHT. I'll come back to that phrase in a minute. So that's the one change, not the scheme, the personal representative. And the second change is that death in service benefits are now out, which seems to be entirely proper. That was never a sort of, inheritance tax dodge or whatever it was. It's kind of life insurance almost. Now, that does not mean that all DB benefits are out. So, for example, if your scheme has a death in deferment benefit, and I'm not talking here about a widow's pension or survivor's pension, I'm talking about a lump sum, that appears to be in still, as far as we can understand. If your scheme has a funeral grant, as far as we can tell, that's a payment out of the scheme. So we think that's in. So, there's a lot of clarification needed. There's a lot of grey areas, sort of, an annuity bought for a second life who isn't a spouse and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of grey areas. I won't go into too much of detail on that because some of it we still don't quite know. But the two big changes in the summer is that the legal onus on making sure the IHT is paid falls to the personal representative, and death in service benefits are out. That's the two big changes. Now, I use this phrase personal representative because that's the phrase that HMRC use. They don't use the phrase executor. Now, one of the reasons for that is there might not be an executor because there might not be a will to execute. So to talk about executors presumes there is one and there might not be one. So instead, they use this phrase personal representative. And that's the person. So this person there might be a will and they might not be an executor. There might be pension benefits payable to people who are not them. So, there are lots of actors in this play. There are the beneficiaries of the pension benefits. There are the executors of the will, if there is one. And there is the personal representative who could be the one and the same or could be completely different. And every situation will be different. So it's worth bearing that one in mind. Now, with no apology, what I'm going to do now is walk you through the 5-stage process that HMRC set out for how all of this is going to work. Now, I'll put a link in the chat to the document I'm referring to at the end, but rather than have you kind of flicking off and reading it in parallel, I'm going to walk you through it. And I'm going to read you paragraphs from it with some commentary, because we've sat and thought about how all this is going to work a bit. So stage 1, so somebody has died. Stage 1, heading information exchange to establish the value of any pension benefits to be included in the estate. So this is stage 1. Everything I'm about to say is stage 1 for now. Okay. So first of all, personal representatives will, as now, identify the pension schemes of which the deceased was a member and contact the relevant pension scheme administrators to inform them of the member's death. They should also inform the scheme whether the deceased had a surviving spouse or civil partner. So immediately, good to have you back with us. Thank you very much for taking. Immediately, what happens is that the personal representative has to find the pension schemes and contact them. Now, that may be fairly straightforward for a DB pension coming into the bank once a month with banks, with payment slips, perhaps once a year, or annual statements, or whatever it is. That may not be too difficult. But if someone's sitting with an uncrystallized DC pot with an insurance company, and the person who died isn't particularly good at keeping paperwork, how's the personal representative even going to find this pension? Now, one idea people have said is, pensions dashboards, which is, of course, the answer to all questions. But there's a couple of problems with pensions dashboards. So first of all, they don't exist. But first of all, once they exist, pensions dashboards are essentially not for pensioners. They're for workers. They're a tool to help workers find their pension, plan their retirement. So pension schemes do not have to send data on pensioners to the dashboard. So if someone dies over pension age and has, perhaps a drawdown pot or something like that, the provider doesn't have to provide that to the dashboard. Added to which, although the plan has been for third-party access to dashboards, so like you could appoint an IFA and your financial advisor could access your dashboard, it's not apparent that that will be functionality on day one. It's also not apparent that you'll be able to nominate somebody else, like the person who will wind up your estate. So even if dashboards are up and running, even if there was third-party access, you still probably couldn't find what you need on the dashboards because the data isn't there to begin with. It might be different if you die under pension age, so it could help a bit, but it's not a silver bullet. So the poor personal representative has got to find the pensions, DB and DC. So because of what I've said, DB, you've got to still contact the DB schemes. Obviously, contact them anyway to stop the pension being paid and trigger any survivors' pensions, but also potentially to find out about lump sum benefits that might be in scope. So we're still, you'll be pleased to know, on stage 1. Once the pension scheme's administrators are aware of a member's death, they will begin their processes to determine how benefits are to be distributed. If the scheme is discretionary, the pension trustees will commence their discretionary processes. Now, this is a 2-stage activity by the pension scheme's administrator. They have to do something straight away, I think within 4 weeks. So they have to reply to the personal representative within 4 weeks to give them, so here we go, regardless of the nature of the scheme, the pension scheme administrator must tell the personal representative the value of the pension for inheritance tax purposes within 4 weeks of being notified of the death. This will be the value of all relevant unused pension funds and pension death benefits as of the date of death. So notice that last little phrase, as of the date of death. So you're running a DC scheme. You need to work out what the pot was when the member died, not what the pot is today. So in principle, you need a process for having daily valuations, which you may not currently have, you may not currently need. I mean, you do a valuation when someone asks you for one, you do it for an annual statement or for a pensions dashboard, but you don't necessarily store daily valuations. Well, you're probably going to have to do that in future. So, but this 2-stage process is the pension scheme's administrator initially simply goes back and says there's £100,000 of DC assets, but the trustees may not at that point have decided who's going to get them. So there might be no expression of wishes form. There might be an expression of wishes form which is self-evidently out of date and refers to, I'm going to say, the first wife when the member's remarried, or children by the first marriage when the member now has children by a second marriage. And so the trustees may have some work to do So all they have to do initially is give a figure to the personal representative. It then says once the pension scheme has completed their process to determine how the benefit should be distributed, they then have a second communication with the personal representative, telling them how the pension benefits will be split between exempt beneficiaries such as spouses and civil partners and non-exempt beneficiaries, essentially everybody else. This process is expected to take longer for discretionary schemes due to the additional time needed to complete the trustee's discretionary process. So again, if you're involved in a trust-based scheme, particularly a trust-based DC scheme or anything with discretion in it, you need to think, I think, about your process and how you can streamline it. Because until you've not just told the personal representative the value, but you've told them who's going to get it and what the split is between exempt and non-exempt, they cannot work out the IHT bill. Because the IHT bill is the sum of the house and the bank balances and all the bits of pensions that are not going to exempt beneficiaries. So you need to get a move on doing your bit to enable the personal representative to do their bit. So that's stage one. You'll be reassured to know that there are 5 stages. So what does the personal representative do next? I'm slightly inclined to say if anyone ever asks you to be a personal representative, run for the hills, but I won't say that. But it's going to be a job and a half, particularly in some cases where there's no paperwork or whatever. So the personal representative, so somebody who's died might have half a dozen pensions, maybe. The personal representative collects information from each pension scheme administrator and other components of the estate. So they need to find all the bank balances, the savings account, the property, the jewelry, the house, whatever else. And to reach a total valuation of the estate and determine whether an inheritance tax account should be returned to HMRC. Now, this doesn't mean IHT is necessarily payable, but it means that potentially the size of the estate, including the pensions, could in principle, depending on who's going to get it, take you into the IHT net. So you don't at this point know, you don't know at this point whether IHT is payable because you haven't heard back from the schemes yet who's getting the benefits. Now, bear in mind, I've just said that the personal representative has to collect information from each pension scheme administrator, which means the personal representative is at the mercy of the worst administrator. Now, I'm just going to pause there while you all mentally picture the worst pension administrator you've ever come across. And that the personal representative is going to be at the mercy of the worst administrator. You know, make sure it's not you. The personal representative then informs all the schemes. So there's this kind of two-way dialogue going all the time. Personal representative informs the schemes that an account is required. The personal rep provides to the schemes an inheritance tax reference number and requests ID information about the pension beneficiaries. Now, this is where it all gets a bit strange because, of course, the personal representative might not be a beneficiary. They might not be a family member, might be. And ultimately, they are going to find out in cases where if none of the money was exempt, there would be IHT to pay. They have to know who's getting the money. So if I'm alive, I nominate who I want my DC pot to go to, I die, the person sorting out the estate is going to find out who I chose, even if I never told them and perhaps didn't really want them to know. Now, you might say they shouldn't be sorting out my estate if that was the case, but the interesting kind of data protection here, because, you know, they can't do their job until they know the split between exempt and non-exempt, which is essentially spouses and others. And remember, unmarried spouses are non-exempt. So a couple who've lived together for 30 years doesn't matter, it's non-exempt. And they need to know who all the beneficiaries are. And I'll come back to that. But basically, I've said to you that the personal representative is legally liable for the IHT, but once the beneficiaries get their money, they are jointly liable with the personal rep for making sure the IHT gets paid. So the beneficiaries come into the game, which is another reason why the personal rep needs to know who they are. Okay. So I hope you're still with me at this point. We are 2 stages through the 5-stage process. So step 3 is headed personal reps file the inheritance tax account and pay IHT if needed. John says, what if there is no personal representative? And I'll come back to that point. I mean, basically, you've got a problem because somebody's got to pay the IHT bill. Somebody's liable to pay the IHT bill, and pension schemes are going to want to know who the personal representative is, possibly before paying out. So actually, there may be some leverage there that somebody's got to be the personal rep. And in many cases, the solicitor will be involved. I mean, Claire Moffat said on our webinar, 7 in 10 cases, there's a solicitor doing a lot of this. But yeah, there is an issue about who is the personal rep, because there's nobody, the will doesn't say who it is. The will says who the executor is. The expression of wishes form says who the beneficiaries are, but they may not be the same thing. So if no inheritance tax account is required, personal reps can tell the beneficiaries and the pension schemes no inheritance tax is due. The personal rep doesn't have to do anything else. They can apply for probate. Life goes on. The pension schemes complete their processes to determine beneficiaries and pay out benefits. So happy days. No IHT bill. It's all fine. If an inheritance tax account is required but no IHT is due, so that might be if the estate plus the pensions is over the threshold, but some of the pensions are going to a spouse, which brings you back under the threshold, you still have to have an account. So if an inheritance tax account is required but no IHT is due, personal reps return an account to HMRC, including the value of the estate, including the value of any pension benefits and beneficiary details. They then apply for probate. So again, that's relatively straightforward. However, if inheritance tax is due, personal reps will establish how much inheritance tax is attributable to the different pension components of the estate and submit an account to HMRC. So just let that sink in. You've got this estate. You've got your nil rate band, maybe your residence nil rate band, but the assets are above those thresholds. What they do is they pro rata the inheritance tax bill pro rata to the size of the different bits of the estate, including pensions. So it's not the case that you can lump all the IHT on the pension bit or all the IHT on the house bit or all the IHT on the bank balance. There's IHT due on the estate covered by the will and on each of the pensions separately pro rata to their size. So what that means is then the next thing it says is and you might well ask, how does this poor personal representative know this information? Well, this is where the digitization comes in. There will be a tool on the HMRC website. The personal rep will have been feeding all the pension information, the beneficiary information in, the other estate information, and it will spew out the calculation, I imagine, with template letters to send to all the pensions administrators with their share of the IHT bill. The personal rep tells the beneficiaries and the pension scheme administrator the amount of the IHT due on their component of the estate. So you've got a DC pension pot. The personal rep says it's £100,000 and 20,000 is due in IHT on that. They tell the beneficiaries, let's say there's a single non-exempt beneficiary, a son or a daughter, let's say. So you tell the pension scheme 20,000 IHT is due, and you tell the beneficiary that 20,000 IHT is due. There are then different ways in which the IHT can be paid. But the two main ones are that you can use scheme pays. So if the IHT bill is above 4,000, the beneficiary has a legal right to ask the scheme to do scheme pays the IHT bill. So in that case, the scheme pays the 20,000 to HMRC, and the member or the beneficiary receives the 80,000 net of the IHT, and life goes on. That's option one. Option two is that the beneficiary can say, no, I want it gross. Now you might well say, well, why might that be? But for various reasons, but let's suppose they take it gross. Now, problem number one is income tax, assuming the person who died was over 75, income tax will then be charged on the gross figure. And of course, that's a bit mad because part of the gross figure is eventually going to use to pay inheritance tax. So you take it gross, you face an income tax bill on the gross figure, you pay the IHT, and then there'll be a mechanism for clawing back the income tax you paid on the bit you never had because it was IHT. So there's a lot to be said for letting the scheme deal with it. Now, schemes are not obliged to do scheme pays for IHT bills of less than £4,000. So that's where what I've just described might be relevant. So the IHT bill's £3,000. The scheme says, well, we're not going to waste our time on the admin of that. We're just going to pay you the gross amount. You sort it out. So you then get an income tax bill on that £3,000, and then you have to put in a claim form to get it back. So I'm doing my best to kind of discourage you all, but we haven't got. So we're on stage 3, would you believe, of 5. So stage 4, distribution of pension benefits. Once they've been notified of a death, the pension scheme administrator and trustees will start the process of identifying beneficiaries. This stage will overlap with stages 1, 2, and 3, you'll be pleased to know. So there's lots of different things all happening at the same time. Once the beneficiaries have been identified, the pension scheme administrator will tell them the amount of pension funds and the benefits they've inherited. They'll set out the options for how they can take the pension, such as lump sums or different forms of pension income. So, of course, the beneficiaries might have choices to make. So suppose there's the possibility of a drawdown account passing on. Do they want it as a drawdown account? Do they want it as a lump sum? So the beneficiary will have that choice to make, and they'll have to choose how they want the IHT paid. Exempt beneficiaries, like spouses and civil partners, will be able to take their benefits immediately, so that's good news. For non-exempt beneficiaries, the PSA, Pension Scheme Administrator, explains IHT may be due. They'll explain that as pension beneficiaries, they are now jointly and severally liable with the personal rep for any IHT due. The pension beneficiary then chooses how they want the IHT to be paid. There's then income tax issues depending on whether you die over or under 75. We're nearly there. We're nearly there. Stage 5, cheerily headed amendments. Because you'll be aware that, stuff happens. Imagine you're going through your late father's estate and going through box number 17 in the loft, and suddenly you find an old pension statement, and it turns out that's in the estate as well. So personal reps will be responsible for managing any amendments to the estate and submitting any amended inheritance tax accounts to HMRC. If an amendment results in more IHT being due, the personal rep will contact the pension beneficiaries or scheme administrator and inform them of the increase. The additional IHT can be paid through one of the ways just described. If an amendment results in less inheritance tax being due, not quite sure how that could happen, but I guess it could, then it all depends whether you've granted probate and so on and so on. When pension beneficiaries are informed of any amendment to the inheritance tax on the estate, they'll need to contact HMRC directly if any corresponding adjustments are needed to the income tax due on their pension funds. So that's all there is to it. Now, I'm now going to share with you in the chat here the link to the thing I've just been reading from, because I think this is, although it's appalling, this is Annex A. You want Annex A to the thing I've just sent you a link to. That is the best description I've been able to come across as to how this will all work and who will do what when. Now, I have a strong suspicion that we're going to get to questions, none of which I know the answer to, but I hoped that bringing you to my level of knowledge and understanding through what I've just said would at least get you thinking. So, Steve, do you want to sort of call people who've got their hands up or pick up questions in the chat?
Yeah, we'll do. Pal Winder's got his hand up. If anybody wants to raise a hand and ask a question, then please interact and ask a question. But Pal Winder, you go first, and then we'll look at the chat as well and bring people in. So over to you, Pal Winder.
Steve, thank you for that. The LCP session last week was excellent, and this overview is excellent and sort of adds more colour, which is really good. Couple of points on this personal representative. I can just clarify. I'm a lawyer, but not a lawyer that deals with estates. I've recently gone through it. If there's a will, the will would nominate executors who effectively take office as an executor on death and have certain responsibilities, but then they apply for probate and they get the letters of probate as part of that. If there is no will, then somebody has to come forward and act as an administrator. They apply for letters of administration through the similar probate process, but they're not officially in office until the letters of probate or letters of administrator have been issued by the court or probate office. And before that, you have to deal with IHT. So you have no authority, but you have to deal with it. So there's quite a lot of complexity there as well. And last week, I asked the question, and you kindly put that to the team, but they're not lawyers and they weren't able to answer the question, is if you're a trustee of a scheme which is going to make a discretionary decision, should you and is it right to consult with the beneficiaries to see whether they want to receive the payment in a particular way to mitigate inheritance tax or not? Because normally executors will look at a will and sometimes say, let's do a deed of variation to the will to mitigate inheritance tax. So they will sort of say, well, instead of the children getting certain assets, the wife will get it, and therefore it will be exempt, and that will reduce the bill. So you can have deeds of variation. And the question really I have is, and this is a legal thing, I'm not expecting an answer, but I just want to put it on the table that we should have a view of whether there's a process for trustees to engage with the estate, the beneficiary, the PR, personal representative, and say, look, we can exercise the discretion this way or that way. What is your input, so that we can factor that in? That might delay the decision-making process, or you might find personal representatives saying, look, all the beneficiaries have got together and they said they would want the discretion to be exercised this way, and I would expect the trustees should consider it, even if they dismiss it and make a different decision.
Yeah.
So very helpful. Few points. I mean, I think there's a lot of complexities in this, especially when you get variations and different dynamics coming into play on that.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for that. And I mean, as you said at first, this is all a pre-probate or administration process. You know, this is essentially, you know, I've also applied for probate a couple of times in the last 18 months, and in each case, you know, the first thing you're saying is I've dealt with all the IHT. And it seems to me that inevitably all of this is going to delay people getting probate. So, you know, some people are going to be pretty slow reporting the death. Schemes have then got time to do their bit. That's going to drag all of that out. Then they apply for probate. Now, my experience of probate is it came through very quickly, but some people have waited months and months. And I think it'll be increasingly common for people still to be sorting out the affairs of a loved one or a friend well over a year after they've died. I mean, I think that will be, which is not great. On your question about what the trustee should do, yeah, I think you're right. You know, you need to consult your lawyers as to what's a legitimate thing to do. You know, clearly you're trying to act in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the trust, but how far can you go down that route? And I think you should certainly do that informed by legal opinion rather than just take a flyer on it. So I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Melinda. Lisa, you have your hand up?
Yes, thanks very much, Steve, for your talk. And I mean, I've had to go through the sort of probate process myself, and just sort of from live experience, you know, the timelines of all of this seem very concerning, actually. And like you say, this idea, you know, you've got to sort out the inheritance tax before you can get probate. And also, you know, you can't leave properties empty, and then you become liable for like double doses of council tax and things like that. It's just this sort of joined up thinking to make what is actually, you know, a difficult time when people are bereaved,
Yeah.
you know, a sort of sensible process, which just seems to be lacking from this, really. So, and I just picked up, you said something about the pension, the beneficiaries are jointly and severally liable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that never, because they might not know they might not be connected at all in any way. And then
That's right.
Yeah.
Excuse me a second, sorry. Yes,
It
that's
always
right.
makes me a bit nervous about joint and several liability.
Well, quite. I mean, you would hope that common sense will prevail, and that if it's apparent from the inheritance tax account which bits of the estate are liable for which bits of inheritance tax, and one bit doesn't get paid. So a beneficiary has to be paid gross, for example. Maybe they're outside the country and they think, well, you know, find me if you can. I mean, you know, who knows really? I think it'd be pretty off for HMRC to then go after the personal rep for the failure of the beneficiary to pay the IHT. Technically they could, and in principle the beneficiary, the personal rep can then take legal action against the beneficiary for failure to pay, but for goodness sake, you know, you know, so there are lots of sort of safeguards and fallbacks, but none of them are particularly attractive, I think. But yeah, it's all kind of designed for a kind of model situation where, everyone knows everyone does the right thing promptly, all the information's there, everyone gets on with each other. And as we know, all too often, that's not the case.
Thank you.
Henry, come to you, and then we might come to John. I think John Mather, because he's got a question in the chat. But you go first, Henry.
Thank you, Steve. Great stuff. And I did take this in last week, and I feel a bit fresher now for knowing it. Thank you. Evelyn Partners came out with an extraordinary figure. I think it's something like £18 billion has been withdrawn recently.
Yeah.
And presumably this is money that was being withdrawn probably because people were worried about the tax consequences of keeping it there. I'm just wondering, what your view or what LCP's view is about the changes that are going to be in the effectively DC pension in retirement situation.
Yeah. No, those were very striking figures, weren't they? So I guess a few things to bear in mind. So probably something I should have said at the start by way of context is at the moment, roughly 5% or so of estates end up with an IHT bill. And the government think that these changes will increase the inheritance bills of about 50,000 estates a year, but 40,000 of those were already paying IHT in the first place. So only 10,000, I say only, but only 10,000 estates will come into IHT because of pensions being included that weren't there already. So it's still the case that the vast majority of estates, there will be no IHT at the end of all of this. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people won't think there might be and act accordingly. But, for the vast majority of mid-market DC pots, you're not coming within a mile of IHT. That's the first observation. But you're right, at the top, and of course, a small number of people at the top moving money soon adds up to your hundreds of millions and your billions. So it's, that's why I think the numbers are so big, because it's the big pots where we've seen the action. A bit of that, I think, might have been pre-budget guessing as to tax-free cash and all of that. So I think, although the Evelyn Partners figures were the 6 months to March, that would include, therefore, October 2024. And October 2024 was the month before the budget. So we don't have month-by-month figures, but my guess would be that some of that money was actually people who read newspaper stories saying tax-free cash is going and had got their money out sharpish. So it's not. I don't think it's all IHT. That's a second observation. The financial advisors I've spoken to about this say that clients are only slowly beginning to catch on. So they are having lots of conversations, but they're not yet doing a great deal about it. Partly because it's 2027, so it feels like some way away, but it's only actually 18 months away, of course. One interesting quirk here is because on the face of it, if you take your money out, your £500,000 DC pot, and you take it out in one go, you're paying 200,000 plus the income tax if you're not careful, and that doesn't seem like a terribly bright idea, given that it's still in the estate, even when you take out the pensions, because you put it in a savings account or something. So you haven't really achieved a huge amount if that's all you do. But what some people are talking about doing now is buying an annuity. And the point about that is you take your £500,000 pot, to make the maths easy, let's say a 8% annuity rate, and just literally to make the maths easy. So that would be 40,000 a year. You've got your 40,000 a year plus occupational pensions, the estate pension, all the rest of it. You've then got surplus income every week and every month and every year. So you gift to the kids or whoever out of your surplus income, and you don't have to survive for 7 years because it's immediately IHT exempt. So you've done two things. You've taken your dirty great pot, which if you take it out in one go, takes you way into top tax rate bands, which you don't want to be in, and you've spread it effectively over the rest of your life. So you're mopping up basic rate band every year, and then you're immediately getting an IHT exemption as soon as you pass it on. So you have to document all this stuff, and it has to be genuinely surplus and all the rest of it. So that, I think, is something we might see more of. And a variation on that is the fixed term annuity. So advisors are saying to me, look, you can buy a 10-year fixed term annuity with a guaranteed capital sum at the end that isn't far short of the capital sum you started with. and that's quite attractive. So I think we'll see a lot of creative financial planning, other ways to shield pension assets. But I think probably, Henry, what I would say is it'll be the advised population as usual. It'll be the big pots typically. But yeah, I think providers and schemes need to realise that they might see a lot of money flowing out. Not necessarily a lot of members, but quite a lot of money might flow out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, one point, I've just got off the phone to Al Rush, who incidentally sends his regards to Bryn Davis, who he'd like to speak with. His tally now is 42. So far this year, he's set up 42 annuities, which are simply paying till state pension date, and is exchanging was primarily ex-BSPS money, which is now sitting in people's accounts because they want income and they want it before they get their state pension. Yeah. And suddenly they become really concerned that they never force it, might fall into this kind of situation. So I mean, totally off the court, but it is absolutely extraordinary. They've got their house, they've got their pension, and yeah, that total story from an IFA who deals with relatively unwealthy people.
Yeah, and of course, when the DB-DC transfer rush, use that phrase, was happening, the fact that the DC pot was outside the IHT net was one of the selling points. You know, it was one of the reasons why some people, transferred. If I die young, my DB pension dies with me. If I die young, my transferred DC pot goes to the kids, and there's no IHT, and that's obviously changed. So, ironically, a lot of people who did DB transfers back in the day are now at risk of making a significant contribution to the revenue from this policy, and some of them those who regret doing it may well want to switch back into an annuity, as you've described, Henry. So yeah, thanks very much, Henry.
Yes, Henry, thanks. Chris, you're next, and then we'll come to Peter.
Thanks. Steve, I want to introduce a new concept. Well, it may not be a new, but I'd be interested if you've heard this before. Introduce something called a personal pension relief, similar to sort of private residence relief. So that would be extra relief, but it would only kick in if the monies were transferred directly into the registered pension scheme of a beneficiary. Has that concept been discussed, and is it not a way of ensuring some sort of intergenerational fairness? It's also something that you would possibly reduce with age, because the primary motive here is really to catch people who are using pension pots as a IHT mitigation.
I guess, Chris, I mean, I can see the logic, but if you're Rachel Reeves and you want money to spend on the NHS in 2027, the last thing you want is another exemption, another way of people avoiding it. I mean, this is a revenue maximising policy, I think. So, obviously, if you've got an older generation who had good pensions and you can help the young generation who don't, in principle, that's a good public policy outcome, but it pales into insignificance compared with the dirty grey hole in the public finances, I'm afraid.
Ah, right. Well, I've got other ideas for the dirty grey hole in the finances, but it's interesting you say that it's not a debate that's been had. I mean, I suppose
I've not heard that. But I mean, it's so second order compared to, they just don't care about, the pension outcomes of the next generation in 30 years' time compared with, winning the next election. I mean, it's just.
Of course, it won't be the generation. Just to make the obvious point, people, the well-off, tend to die in their 80s and 90s with children in their 50s and 60s. So in that sense, it is actually quite pertinent for those who in their 50s and 60s are still not going to have a significant enough pot to get a reasonable income. But if that money was to go directly without tax credit, this is the point. If they get it as a beneficiary and they're paying under 100% of their salary is a contribution, then the Treasury subsidise it, don't they? But if it was transferred directly across without that tax credit, then the Treasury would actually gain.
Well,
I'm not aware of those conversations anyway. But
Chris, your idea is we've got to raise tax. I think that's what Steve's saying. So there you go. Peter, let's come to you. What have you got to say, Peter? Do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, Steve, for once again an excellent presentation and covering the issues. I've got two sort of areas. One, I put in the chat some points I made in the original technical consultation on the inheritance tax, and I the two things are there is that basically, as a pension scheme, we like to pride ourselves on paying out the benefits to the beneficiaries as quickly as possible following the death, as soon as we're notified. And this procedure seems to be slowing that down substantially by certainly several months. And I think the payment to an exempt beneficiary, the pension administrators should be able to make that immediately, because it's not going to be liable to tax. And in these other cases where there's non-exempt beneficiaries, then they can distribute 60% of the funds, i.e. withholding the maximum inheritance tax that would be liable on that section of the estate, to as an IHT reserve, which the personal representative can call upon to pay the pension, to pay the inheritance tax. And when that is paid, that should be the end of the involvement of the pension administrator in the estate. So if they've done that correctly, then they have, if the tax has been over or underpaid, then the personal representative should remit the funds back to the pension scheme for them to distribute according to their rules. So that was my thoughts there.
Yeah, and thank you for putting it in the chat. I've been able to read it as well. I mean, on your first point about just getting on with paying out to exempt beneficiaries, I agree. It would be very unfortunate if all of this slowed down the process of just paying the money to people. Obviously, there's no IHT going to be payable. They presumably need the money pretty pressingly, and so if schemes feel they have to wait for all of the process and the final confirmations and all the rest of it, then that would be regrettable. It'd be interesting to see whether HMRC can allow some easement for that. So I sympathise with that a lot. Less convinced about paying out 60% to non-exempt beneficiaries and holding back 40%, which might turn out not to be the right number. I think, although you just use the language of the personal representative remitting such to so and so, and in some cases these are going to be bereaved lay people who are overwhelmed by all of this, and it's complicated enough as it is. I think if you then say, one pension scheme chooses to hold back 40% as a maximum, pays out 60%, but might ultimately pay out a bit more. Another pension scheme waits and then gets the right figure and pays the right amount, and the personal reps keeping tabs on which scheme did what and how much is the balance and who has to pay what extra and has it been done, and check with the beneficiary, who might themselves be elderly, says, well, I don't know, dear, I got something in my bank account, don't know what it was, and then there's a figure, which figures that, I just think I can see the point that you want to get money out as quickly as you can, and I get the spirit of it, but in practice, if schemes are doing different things, you're just going to make the life of the personal rep a nightmare, even more than it is already. So I'm with you more on the first than your second suggestion, I guess, with me in mind.
And the other small point was where it's so there's 3 points I want to make, but the second one there is where the pension is, it's a pension guarantee period payment. I'm thinking of my background's in DB, so I'm thinking of the 5-year pension guarantee. Yeah. Which is it can be down to the lump sum can be down to 1/365th of the annual payment, so it can be a pretty minimal amount. And I suggest that tax on that could just be collected under the PAYE system rather than through inheritance tax, and it comes out of it's not reflected in the estate and that sort of thing. It would just simplify it greatly. I mean, that's it. Yeah. Indeed, practical point.
And I think the rhetoric around this policy change is that since pension freedoms, DC pensions have been used as a sort of inheritance tax planning vehicle, and that wasn't ever intended.
Mhm.
But once you start talking about DB, death in deferment, guarantee payments, and all that kind of stuff, it's like, well, why are we putting these in the IHT net? I mean, it seems to me they're a different kind of thing, that kind of quasi life insurance, or
That's right.
you know.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
Great,
it's-
thanks.
you
I'm
know,
aware, John, you put a question in the chat, and we've been skipping over you every time, but I don't think I have any answers. So, John Mather, you put 2 questions. Any time limits on amendments? I don't know the answer to that one, I'm afraid. And is there a limit to the fees a personal rep can charge? I'm not aware that there is. Now, it may be that what will happen, you see, what I think will happen, John, and I'll come to you because you've got your hand up, is I think we haven't yet seen the uproar about all of this. So we have for farmers, because it's kind of obvious, and you can turn up in Parliament Square with a tractor and people notice. But the people who are going to suffer because of all of this don't even know who they are yet. So, I think a lot of the pushback on this will happen post-April 2027, the first time a journalist is bereaved and they discover what everybody's actually had to go through, and I think there'll be a bit of an uproar then, and we may well get people, we may get sharks coming in saying, oh, it's all terribly complicated, you can't possibly do it yourself, we'll charge some exorbitant sum to sort it, a bit like claims management companies. I'm not aware there's any regulation at the moment, but I suppose if it's solicitors doing it, there's rules around solicitors regulation and so on. But John, did you want to come in?
Well,
Sorry,
I don't think it matters which set of sharks you appoint, whether they're lawyers or ambulance chasers or what. But certainly the poor will get ripped off, because the nearest analogy is the liquidator. And anybody who's dealt with liquidators knows that the fees tend to expand to fill the cash available. And I think the small pots are going to get ripped off, and the large pots will find solutions. I mean, you could take your analogy with the annuities and then apply that surplus income, which is outside the estate on gifting, to a life policy and leverage like we used to do in 1972. In fact, something I did for Dennis Healy at that time. And that works. I mean, you've got the associated operations legislation so you've got to make sure you've got both sides properly underwritten. But that's the way that will escape. So I just fear that this is going to actually produce less money, not more. That's over time. It's and the only people who get any money out of it are the liquidators, not the revenue. So I think it's rather sad on this sad move, and it will discourage people from putting money in pensions. And certainly the people who get discouraged, who've got large pensions, are the ones who put money in on behalf of their employees. So I've seen that happen, of schemes pulled, generous schemes pulled, because the top guys got murdered on their pensions. So I think that's a rather sad move.
Yeah. There's a comment in response to that, John, a comment from Bryn in the chat saying he doesn't think we're talking about small pots, but presumably what you're saying is you could have an estate, a house, something, and other stuff, and then a small pension pot on top. So a small pension pot on itself wouldn't get you over the IHT threshold, but a small pension pot as part of an estate could still have an IHT bill attached to it.
Yeah, but a lot of these estates under 2 million are going to get tipped over the 2 million level, and there you're going to get people paying 80% tax.
Yeah,
you're going to get those highly motivated people to do something inventive. And then the other question is a pension scheme part of the UK assets? Is it for people who are abroad? I now live in Portugal. Is my UK pension something that gets an inheritance tax even though I've got no assets in the UK? Or is that part of my Portuguese estate? I don't know the answer to that yet. So I think it's a retrograde statement, but we'll see how it goes. But thank you very much for the explanation. It made me smile at the simplicity that's been introduced here.
Yeah.
Complexification, John, that's what the industry creates. It's great. I know Pal Winder's spoken, and I know Bobby Ridaway's are both trustees. Bobby, do you want to just quickly unmute and just talk about your opinion on the impact on trustees, sponsors, because this is all about cost as well. Sir Steve mentioned pension lawyers, third-party administration, extra admin cost, extra costs for trustee boards. Bobby, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be just complexity for no real value. So I think we'll need a lot of consulting help on this. I think, and a lot of legal help. So looking for some good legal advisors and consultants to deal with this and to think what doesn't tend to happen in the pensions industry. Think about the smaller schemes. I don't think they're just all going to consolidate to get rid of this. They're not. So I mean, scheme I look after, £7 million lawyers scheme. It's a lawyers scheme. A lot of them going to be hit by it. Yeah, so it's going to massively increase their admin costs.
And trustee costs.
And trustee costs, yeah.
It's just extra time. Okay. Steve, I know we've got about 5 minutes. I did want to ask you briefly about the 26th of November, whether you had a top 2 or 3 amendments or ideas that might come in. Do you want to spend a few minutes on your thoughts? Because I know you put a paper out on it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, very quickly. So we did a paper yesterday called How to Avoid an Omni-Shambles Budget. And those of you who are old enough to remember the 2012 budget, I may have been somewhere near government at the time, and the various, the pasty tax and the caravan tax and the U-turns within a few weeks and a few months. And what we've done in the paper is we've looked at the two kind of the ones people always talk about. So getting rid of high rate relief and capping tax-free cash. And then we've added a third, which is getting rid of salary sacrifice on the basis that HMRC did some research with employers saying, what would you do if we got rid of salary sacrifice for pensions, which is like a provocative thing to do. And they published it earlier this year. So we did those 3. And then what we did was said, well, OK, all of them could raise billions. It depends how you do it. Salary sacrifice costs $4 billion a year of NI savings. Higher rate relief, a lot more than that. Tax-free cash, probably more than that. So you could, no doubt you could raise a lot of money. And then we put 5 tests against each of those to say, well, what would make Rachel Reeves think twice? And they're not necessarily all the obvious ones, but things like you've got a manifesto commitment not to tax workers more. So how many of these could be perceived as taxing workers more? Depends on your theology, I think, slightly on that, but a number of them clearly. What about the impact on public sector workers? And some of you might say, well, why are they special? Well, I think to a Labour government, they are special. That part of the core support of the government, and industrial relations are quite sensitive in a number of public sector schemes and workforces. So they will be mindful of measures which particularly affect the public sector. And things like tax-free cash, it's tempting to assume it's people with, £1 million DC pots or something like that. But actually 30 years long service on a middling wage in the public sector gets you a 6-figure tax-free lump sum. So actually capping tax-free cash could affect long-serving mid-ranking public servants, not just, people with vast DC pots. So impacts on the public sector, whether you get any money soon. So, getting rid of higher rate relief, probably get a lot of money. But actually, just think how long it would take to consult on, draft the legislation for, draft the regulations for, give everyone time to redo their systems. Would you get any money before the election? Probably not. And going back to the public sector point, just imagine someone's getting higher rate relief, not just on their teacher's contribution, but on the school's 20-odd% that's going in. And you took away higher rate relief, not just on the bit they see, but the bit they don't see. You'd be getting 4-figure tax bills for, deputy head teachers and heads of departments and schools and stuff. So I think some of these things will take a long time to implement. Get capping tax-free cash, you'd need dirty great transitional protection for people who are over the cap and about to retire, meaning you probably didn't get any money for years. So we think a number of these just wouldn't give you any money anytime soon. There's the impact on employers. You just put 25 billion employer nicks on. You're worried about the state of the economy and jobs and growth and all of that. So another hit on employers you'd be nervous about. So, and we go through all of these factors and all of these considerations, plus, the adequacy of pension saving and the fact that there's already 14 million not saving enough, and anything you do in the space probably increases that number. So what we conclude from all of that is, all of these kind of look quite attractive and low-hanging fruit and billions attached, but all of them have got absolute bear pits attached. And that old phrase, there be dragons, springs to mind. So, there is a reason why successive governments haven't done these things, and we think probably those reasons will continue to apply this year. So yeah, that's a paper in a nutshell. Henry.
Yeah, I remember in 2012 what your job was. and you didn't get much of a say about that omni shambles. I bet you're glad you weren't.
Nothing to do with me, Gov.
I noticed Mr. Torsten Bell is currently in the Treasury, sorting out the Treasury's budget for 26th of November. Do you envy him, or not?
I mean, it's got to make sense to have a pensions minister in the Treasury, and the idea that until the recent announcement that he was involved in the budget, we might think that he wasn't involved in the budget seems extraordinary, really. So, you know, when the big announcement was Torsten Bell to be involved in the budget, you think, well, he's a Treasury minister, for goodness sake, you know. But, you know, I don't envy him in the sense that trying to do all this stuff when the government's broke and trying to raise billions in, you know, marginally less unpopular ways than other unpopular ways is never fun, really. So, you know, I don't, you know, we came in 2010 and had to do some pretty tough stuff to sort the public finances out, and that wasn't what I thought I was going into. But, you know, you do your best with the hands you dealt, really. There's a couple of hands we go to quickly, Steve.
Bryn, I think we'll bring you in first because Bobby's already spoken. But Bryn, what do you want to say? And then we'll come to Bobby.
Yeah, people talk about higher rate tax relief taken away from high earners. You need to understand who is going to be caught by this. One point which isn't widely understood is that it won't be the earnings in the pay packet that tip you into the higher rate relief. It will include the cost of the pension scheme when you start paying higher rate. So it would be the figure at which you will be caught isn't the threshold for higher rate relief. It's the threshold higher rate relief minus the cost of the pension, and that's going to include a lot. I always say nursing managers, subject heads in large schools. That's the people it's going to catch. Now, maybe you think they should be paying more tax, but I think you're going to have problems if you try and push that through.
No, absolutely, Bryn. Well, that's kind of really what I was saying when you're not just taking account of what the teacher puts in, but what the school puts in. So you might be a teacher on 45,000 a year, but if your employer's putting 20% in, and that suddenly is treated as something on which you can pay the difference between basic and higher rate relief, then you're going to be a basic rate taxpayer and get a bill. And of course, higher rate tax threshold in real terms has come down very dramatically. So there's far more people paying higher rate tax. So, you know, it's going to affect a whole lot more people who don't think of themselves as well off. You know, if you're a single earner in the southeast on 45,000, you know, with a couple of kids or something, you probably don't feel particularly well off. So
And another practical point is, and this is we've learned this from the doctors, that you won't actually know how much you need to pay because you might get promoted during the year until the following year. And so the outstanding tax will be collected as a lump sum. People will get the brown envelope. Doctors talk about the brown envelope that tells them some of them it's a 5-figure sum if they've had some significant promotion. If you think people on high 30s, mid 40s earnings are going to say, well, that's okay, Gov. You need to understand. Lots of people. It's very easy to say take away higher rate tax relief. The practicalities are, I think, they make it totally implausible.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that, Bryn. Thank you. Shall we just take Bobby and then we'll wrap up, Steve?
Yeah, that's it. Bobby, last to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say we talk about sharks, but I think this just make it be a scammer's paradise as well. So I think they need to go into this with their eyes open to make sure that they can close the doors on scammers.
Yeah, good point, Bobby. Yeah, get Margaret Snowden on the case; she'll sort it out. So, there you go.
I put a link in the chat to the paper we published yesterday, if that's of interest.
Yeah, Omni Shambles is in the chat. Thanks for that, Steve. Brilliant, Steve. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation and your thoughts today. I'm sure everybody will clap or virtually clap for a great session. Really enjoyed that. Thank you, Henry. And yeah, we would like to hope that we get the video up in the next hour or two on Playpen. So. Steve, thank you very much for your time today, for your thoughts.
Pleasure. Thank you all.
Yeah, really, really good. And hope you all have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. We pray for peace in the East and we pray for peace in the Middle East. And next week, we're talking about Bitcoin again, because we ran out of time last time. So Bitcoin part 2, Bitcoin and pensions part 2. So that's a very exciting subject. So there we are. Hope you can join us next time on Pension Playpen. Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.
Thanks all.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers.